Our next presenter is Elisabeth Tova Bailey. And you might have heard about her because she wrote a book, and that has gotten some pretty wide attention. Her essays and short stories have received Pushcart Prize nominations and a notable essay listing in the Best American Essays. Her natural history memoir, or memoir, as John Malkovich says, The Sound of Wild Snails Eating, received National Outdoor Book Award in Natural History Literature and will receive a John Burroughs Medal Award for Distinguished Natural History this spring. The story of Elisabeth's year-long observations of a wild Maine woodland snail has already become an international seller, with a universal audience as well as a special home in the fields of natural history and medicinal humanities. Okay? Now, The Sound of Wild Snails Eating is a very unique book of natural history and a memoir. It's the true story of how her unusual gastropod companion helped her through a very difficult time. And she often has to explain to ignorant grown-ups that it's not a children's book. And so this is a quote, "No, this is an adult book," she patiently explains. "Snails have extremely interesting lives. In fact, their courtship is quite remarkable. There is an entire chapter on slime. And they have a memory, and they like comfortable places to sleep and very good food." And so, but we have a very unusual presentation tonight because Elisabeth couldn't be here to present in person. So she's worked really hard to make an audio presentation to go with her slideshow. And so, but she is here in spirit. And so I'd like you to welcome Elisabeth Tova Bailey.
This is the true story of an individual snail, a wild Maine forest snail, a Neohelix albolabris. When my life took an unexpected turn, I observed my small snail companion for a year, as recounted in my recently published adult literary nonfiction book, The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating. I wrote poetry in college and wanted to write more, but there was way too much to do in life. I was a very physically active person. I hiked, kayaked, sailed, snowshoed, and danced. I cut trails in my woods and moonlighted in the visual arts. I was also a professional gardener in my 20s and grew 1,000 seedlings a year for my own gardens. I participated in an international seed exchange. In the spring, my refrigerator was full of seeds that needed cold storage before they could germinate. Then, at the age of 34, on a rare vacation, I encountered a mysterious, nearly deadly pathogen. It changed my life forever. I was bedridden for a year, made a partial recovery, had multiple relapses, and was completely bedridden again. I was unable to do anything. Then a forest snail took up residence on my nightstand. Last week, this trivia question about my book popped up on the internet. How did the snail get into the bedroom? I began to watch the snail. It had adventures and interesting habits. It was nocturnal, so the night was not so lonely. I listened carefully, and I could hear the sound of the snail eating. The snail's bedside companionship kept me from giving up all hope. Soon the snail was moved into a terrarium of native woodland plants. While the human world rushed around, the snail was quiet like me. While the human world was too busy to spend much time with someone who was ill, the snail was always there. My snail had retractable eyes on the tips of its tentacles. The snail's tentacles, wrote Ernest Ingersoll in 1881, are as expressive as a mule's ears. The snail could pull 10 times its weight, and it had teeth, 2,640 teeth. I decided to write a book-length natural history thank you note to the snail. When I was a little better, I began to read scientific volumes on gastropods, the Latin word for snail. I read lying down, holding a book over my head. Sometimes the books fell on me. I used my door jamb to organize my table of contents and choose quotes. There were endless creative decisions, from word and sentence choices to structure and plot. I wrote late at night. I was nocturnal like my snail. When I got stuck, I went to bed. There was always a flashlight, notepad, and pen on the side table, and in the morning my insomniac notes from the night before held the answers to the upcoming evening's work. There were perpetual piles on my desk. I dreamed of a writing space not in my living room. What came first, the chapter on a snail's 3 senses or the snail's remarkable courtship and love life? Could I write a whole chapter on slime? Could I go back in time to when a snail and a human were single cells? Did snails think? Here is my kitchen recording studio where I read some drafts aloud, as listening to my voice helps with the editing. The backdrop of my natural history memoir was the challenge and isolation of illness. Tim Pierce, a malacologist, snail scientist at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, was my consultant. It was a slow process, but finally the first draft of my book was ready to go to the publisher. I tied it up with ribbon. It was an exciting day. I was only 2 years into the 4-year writing process. Luckily, I didn't know that at the time. In the fall of 2009, the manuscript was complete. Here is a fraction of my book drafts. What used to be annoying piles are now my archives. The boxes in the back are my source and permission materials for quotes from Elizabeth Bishop, Gerald Durrell, Darwin, Rilke, E.O. Wilson, and dozens of others. The book illustrations needed to accurately show the snail's interesting behaviors. I covered a porch table with woodland plants. You can see my friend Donna Ray's hands and camera as she filmed a snail of the right species. See how this forest snail glides over the tips of moss? Upon this slime, as upon a kind of carpet, the snail proceeds, wrote Oliver Goldsmith in 1774. We put the snail on a piece of saran wrap so that we could get some good full-body shots. The snail loved the saran wrap as it could speed glide. See how the snail's body contours to the leaf in the photo above? Finally, my book was launched on August 24th, 2010. I was exhausted. I wasn't ready for national publicity. It took a while to get used to interviews. I had lived such a quiet life, and writing and illness are both very isolating. It is interesting to watch a book glide out into the world. Editions have now come out in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. A Chinese edition is in the works, and a German offer has just come in. A friend sent along this photo from a Seattle store. It's fun to see the different company the book keeps. Here it is, with a lot of other books on animals. I still have an illness and terrariums, but I don't have a snail anymore. Malacologists are happy that their favorite animal is a main character. The sound of a wild snail eating is finding a home in the natural history and literature fields, but also in the medical humanities field, where literature about the illness experience helps medical students learn compassion skills. I am still following the snail as it travels via my book around the world. Here is a short film clip we shot of a forest snail gliding over moss. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to record the applause and send it to her, okay? And I just want to read a quote from the book. It's a lovely, lovely book. So, naturally solitary and slow-paced, the snail was beautiful to watch as it glided silently along, leading me through a dark time into a world beyond that of my own species. So it's a wonderful story about a fierce resilience in adversity and a courageous flight of imagination like no other.